Polycystic kidney disease is a leading cause of kidney failure, and it can be passed down from parents to children. But pre-implantation genetic testing combined with in vitro fertilization bring the promise of ensuring that PKD is not transmitted to the next generation. Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the Health Biz Podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. My guest today is Richard Kellner, founder of the PKD Outreach Foundation, which is on a journey to end polycystic kidney disease. If you like this show, please subscribe and leave a review. Richard, welcome to the Health Biz Podcast.
Thank you for having me, David.
Great. Really appreciate the work that you're doing. We're going to talk about that. I want to talk a little bit about kind of your overall background, how you got into this. Just curious about your background. What was your childhood like? If you had childhood influences that stuck with you throughout your career?
Yeah, it's specific to PKD. The PKD comes from my late wife's side of the family. We met when I was 20 years old, and I first learned about PKD. We had been dating for a couple of weeks, and she brought me home to meet her parents. And her mother was on home dialysis in between kidney transplants. So her mother had PKD. So I started learning about it at a young age, and I got engaged at 21, married at 23, and when I got married, I knew one day that that Joanne's kidneys would fail and that I would donate a kidney, and that's what I did. So my history with PKD started pretty young.
Yeah. And what have you done? I know we're going to talk about the PKD Outreach Foundation, but what has been your professional path?
So I started my career as a CFO, COO in the physical commodities trade, very risk management and operations intensive. And I now am in a second career for the past 20 years on the risk management and insurance side, and also very focused on execution, getting things processing and getting things done.
Well, it's certainly helpful when you're going to start up a foundation and try to get things done. And there's some pretty big goals that are on the list there for the foundation. So I'm sure it's been helpful to have that type of background.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a career of taking on things I'd never done before. So this is kind of what I'm used to, and I'm excited about it.
All right, so let's start with what is polycystic kidney disease. I'm just going to guess that it's a disease of the kidney that involves multiple cysts, but that's about all I can tell from the title.
Yeah, so polycystic kidney disease is a genetic condition that causes cysts to grow on your kidneys. So the cysts are somewhat microscopic at birth. But as you get older, the cysts get bigger, and eventually, and depending on the family history, the cysts get so large that they eventually cause kidney failure. And in the most common form of it, it will cause kidney failure by late 40s, early 50s, requiring dialysis and transplant.
Now, is this something that's it sounds like it's not ultra rare, but it's also not so common. How many people are we talking about that are affected?
So there's 600,000 cases of PKD in the US. A lot of them undiagnosed, right? The PKD Foundation has some pretty good statistical models that help us determine that 600,000 number. So it is hardly an orphan disease, and it is the largest cause of kidney failure for people under 50.
What is the sort of the so-called natural history? What typically happens? You sort of mentioned it that you may have these microscopic cysts at birth, and then at a certain point in your 40s or 50s, it may become fairly severe. What sort of tends to happen to people?
Yeah, so again, when I met my wife, she had been diagnosed in a sonogram. They could see the cysts relatively small.
Yeah.
Went through our 20s, our 30s. It was a non-issue, no impact on kidney function. But as she got into her 40s, they started monitoring it more closely. And by 47, she, she needed a kidney transplant.
And how has the understanding of PKD changed over the years? Was it the sort of the same view 30 years ago about what you would do if you had it as it is today?
So it's an interesting thing because 30 years ago, all the doctors would tell you, hey, there's nothing you could do about PKD until your kidneys fail, and then it's dialysis and transplant. Interestingly enough, that is still the conventional wisdom among most doctors, even nephrologists, um, that are not specialists in PKD. That's still what they're teaching in medical school. I have a daughter-in-law and very good friends. They've graduated med school, 4 years ago, and yeah, no, med school they taught them that with PKD there's nothing you can do. Wait till kidney failure. But when you start talking to PKD specialists, the nephrologists, and they're rare, but they exist. Um, there are things in terms of therapeutics, diet, lifestyle that can be done to slow the progression, but there's still no cure. But the most important thing that's been around for over 25 years that's not spoken about enough and well known enough is that with in vitro fertilization and pre-implantation genetic testing, they can evaluate which of the embryos don't have PKD
Mm-hmm.
and only implant those. And I forgot to mention PKD is a dominant gene genetic condition. So 50% of the embryos will typically have PKD. Um, so without this testing, there's a 50% chance that each child will have PKD. With this additional screening, they could basically reduce the risk of passing it on to future generations to virtually nothing. And then that next generation, they don't need to think about it because they won't have it. They won't be at risk of passing it on to their future generations. So it is truly parents that are become aware of this, that have the access to it. They could end this generational suffering in their families.
Yeah. Well, that is, normally we hear about people trying to put an end to something that's very difficult. It's more the incremental kind of an approach. Here's something that actually could work. This is almost 100% of the time if you can actually employ it. So I
Yeah,
understand why that
yeah.
would be a
It's
focus.
there. There's a lack of awareness, and then obviously a lack of access, because in the in vitro and the genetic testing is not always covered
Right.
by insurance. So we're both working to help create the awareness. And David, I appreciate your helping us do that part of it today. But we also help with the funding for families that don't have insurance to cover it.
Sounds good. All right, we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's three main thrusts of the foundation, as I understand it. And one is live kidney donation. As you said that when people get to the point of progression where they need a new kidney, dialysis you could do that, but kidney donation is good. Slowing progression, which you've talked about that, and then the ending PKD in families, which we'll talk about in more depth. On the kidney donation side, you mentioned your late wife. Of course, I'm sorry to hear that. Kidney donation, kidney transplant generally could work pretty well, but um, what happens when someone with PKD gets a kidney transplant? Is it the same as anybody else getting a kidney transplant, or what is it
Yeah,
like?
it's pretty much the same,
Yeah,
right? So kidneys fail. Um, you find a donor, you get a deceased donor, and then it's great, but it's
yeah,
not a perfect solution, right? It's a lifetime of immunosuppressants,
right, right,
um, and unfortunately, those immunosuppressants, eventually can take a toll.
yeah. Now, on the slowing progression side, you mentioned that a bit. How early, when you talk about slowing progression, as you mentioned in the 20s and 30s, it was really kind of a non-factor. would there be things that people in their 20s and 30s would be doing now, ideally?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are definitely dietary changes, right, in terms of controlling sodium, protein, oxalates, that again are not common knowledge, but amongst PKD specialists, they talk about that. There's a dietary supplement called Keto that we believe is promising. But so the most important thing that we think for young adults, um, if you're in your 20s and 30s and you have a family history of PKD, um, getting under the care of a PKD specialist nephrologist, we think is critical because they can then help guide you with regards to diet and the therapeutics that are available. But I have a 28-year-old and a 30-year-old that both have PKD, and if they were to do nothing, you know, you know, their grandmother's kidneys failed before she was 50. Their mother's kidneys failed before they were 50. That's their outcome. We are hopeful with some of the dietary and lifestyle changes that they're making. That maybe they get an extra 10 to 15 years out of their native kidneys, which could be life changing.
So let's talk about this initiative about ending PKD in families. And we talked about it's basically pre-implantation genetic testing with IVF. So in IVF, you're creating these embryos and then implanting them. And then, as typically as IVF is done, there's multiple embryos. And then the testing is reasonably straightforward. Um,
Yeah. So even before you start the IVF, they'll develop what's called a probe, right? So they will identify the gene in the parent with the PKD. So you'll know before you even start the in vitro process whether they've developed an effective probe, um, that would allow them to compare the embryos against the probe and identify which of the embryos don't have PKD, and then only implant those.
Got it. And is that a straightforward thing? You could expect to have a probe that works, or is that a point of failure as well?
Um, if there's a family history of PKD rather than a de novo case,
Yeah.
um, the probability of having an effective probe is in the high 90%.
Okay.
And again, you'll know if you have a successful probe pretty early in the process. If you're a de novo case where you're the first one in your family to have it,
Yeah.
which is less than 5% of the cases, there's still a high probability that they'll be able to develop an effective probe, but it's more complicated, more involved, and the success rates are not quite as high. But again, even before you start the expensive in vitro process, you would know if you have an effective probe.
Got it. All right. So let's say you have an effective probe that's going to be, high 90% of people. And then when you're testing the embryos, my elementary genetics is right then about half of the embryos are going to be, ones that you would want to implant, and half are ones that you're not going to want to. So it's not like you're knocking out 80 or 90% of them. It's just still you got half to
That
work
that's
with.
that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So it's now become scientifically more feasible to do this, and the genetic testing is a lot less expensive and more refined than it was. IVF is still expensive. You've got this new partnership with US Fertility. So why? I mean, first of all, why do you need a partnership as opposed to just telling people, "Hey, this is available, go do it"?
Yeah, well, I mean, the most important thing with the partnership, with US Fertility, is they have a national footprint, so they're pretty widespread throughout the country, and they're offering, for families that are participating in our grant programs, they're offering a 20% discount on the out of pocket cost. So with our grants and their discounts, um, we're basically decreasing the cost of, again, it differs a little bit by parts of the country, but roughly from $30,000 to about $15,000, which again won't put it in reach of everyone, but we'll certainly get it in the reach of many more people.
And what is the source of the grant funding?
Um, I've provided a lot of funding for the initial funding for PKD myself, but it's been largely of friends and family. But we've got a substantial amount of funding available, and our goal is, look, we'll get the first on our backs, get the first 100+ babies born without this disease over the next couple of years. And then hopefully then we'll start getting more of those families contributing, and potentially some institutional funding for this.
Sounds good. Okay, so you make it more, first of all, you let people know that this is doable. You make the funding available. You've got the partnership of somebody that can actually uh, understands what to do and can pull it off on a national basis. And you have a goal of 100 or some babies in the next couple of years. Is that the rough scale that we're talking about?
Well, we've got committed funding for the first 100.
Yep.
And when we launched the campaign, we launched it as our 100 PKD free babies campaign. We already have over 100 families in the registry. So, and again, the cycle from time somebody signs up into the registry, starts exploring it, goes through the process, it takes time, right? 9 women can't have a baby in 1 month,
Yeah.
right? So we've already dropped the 100 from the initiative, because we are certainly not stopping at 100.
Yeah.
But we've already got the enrollments, and now it's within the next 24 months, just based on the work that we've already done, there'll be over 100 babies through this program that are PKD free.
Oh, that's great. Are there other initiatives like this, maybe other inherited diseases where people are doing something similar? I don't know if US Fertility has got other foundations that they work with in a similar capacity.
I'm not fully versed on it. I know there's another organization that we've taken some guidance from called B'nai Olam, which is focused on recessive genes in the Orthodox Jewish community, and so this is clearly something that has been done before. And the interesting thing is, if you go to your OBGYN with a family history of a disease like Tay-Sachs,
right,
or BRCA, your OBGYN is going to tell you, go get genetic testing. There are things you could do to prevent it from being passed on.
Yep.
For some reason, the OBGYNs have not been educated to realize that PKD should be on that list that they tell their patients, oh, you should go to get genetic testing for. But we're here to change that.
Good. Yeah, it sounds like certainly a worthy goal, and one you could actually see it possibly happening. And to the extent that anything happens in the American healthcare system, it seems like we got a shot at it.
We're not doing something that hasn't been done before with other diseases, right? And people have asked me, well, how come it's not being done with PKD? And I'm like, well, you know what? The other diseases, it started with somebody at an organization turning around and saying, we have to stop this. So we're at the beginning of the end for PKD, because we are determined to make it happen.
Great. So
and
what
it
is
doable.
So what is your level of optimism about the future as it relates to PKD?
I have no doubt that we're going to make we're going to make this happen. We've already got traction, we've got momentum, and it's really just a question of it takes time.
Good. My last question for you could or could not be related to what we've just been discussing, but whether you've had a chance to read any good books lately, anything that you might recommend for the audience.
I wish I had a great answer for that, but I will tell you, between PKD and the time that it puts, my other 2 businesses that I run, and I recently remarried with 3 grandchildren and 1 on the way. I do not I do not have the time to sit down and read a book. But one of these days I'll get there.
Okay, I think that's a good answer. I sometimes also ask about if you have any books to recommend that we avoid, but it sounds like you haven't had a chance to read any bad ones either. So that's the
No,
that's the other
no, no.
side of it.
I've got plenty of other things that are keeping me super busy.
Good. Well, Richard Kellner, founder of the PKD Outreach Foundation, which is called, I guess, PKDO,
Yes.
on a journey to end polycystic kidney disease. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Health Biz Podcast.
And thank you, David. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Health Biz Podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.